My parents convinced my husband to divorce me because I was infertile. First, a little about me. I'm Eileen. I just turned 30, and I live a quiet little life in the suburbs with my 2-year-old daughter, Leah. I'm a single mom, and honestly, it's the happiest I've ever been. I've got this cozy little house, a job I actually enjoy, and a small but solid support system. Life hasn't always been like this, though. 3 years ago, I was in a very different place, like crying on the bathroom floor, kind of different. And it all started with two things: my parents and my ex-husband. Growing up, I always knew my family wasn't exactly functional. My parents were the classic golden child/scapegoat kind of parents. My younger brother, Jack, was their pride and joy while I was, well, just there. Don't get me wrong, they weren't outright abusive or anything, but they made it clear that Jack was the one who could do no wrong. If he got a B on a test, they'd throw him a party. If I got an A, what? You couldn't get an A plus? You get the picture. Still, I tried so hard to get them to see me. I'd help around the house, get good grades, even give up things I loved just to make them happy. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. They barely noticed. But when I turned 23, things started to change, at least for a little while. That's when I met Ryan. Ryan was, well, back then, he was everything I thought I wanted. He was older than me by 10 years, super charming, and had this knack for making me feel like I was the only person in the room. My parents loved him, loved him. Suddenly, it was like I was part of their family for the first time ever. They'd invite us over for dinner, gush about how lucky I was to have found someone so stable and responsible, and even treat me like I actually mattered. It felt amazing, and I think that's part of why I fell for Ryan so hard. It wasn't just him I loved. It was the way he made my parents finally see me. We dated for a couple of years, got engaged, and then married when I was 25. For a while, things were good. Great, even. We had this cute little apartment, stable jobs, and a pretty solid relationship. But then came the dreaded question. So, when are you two going to have kids? Now, I wasn't in any rush to become a mom. I was only 25, but my parents were relentless. Every time we saw them, it was, "You're not getting any younger, Eileen," or "Ryan would make such a great dad." Ryan, bless him, was on my side at first. He told them we weren't ready, and he was supportive of waiting. But the pressure kept building, and eventually I caved. I figured, okay, maybe we could start trying. People do it all the time, right? How hard could it be? Oh boy, if only I'd known what was coming. So, Ryan and I started trying for a baby. At first, it was kind of exciting, like this big new chapter we were stepping into together. But as the months went on and nothing happened, I started to feel, broken. I was doing everything right, tracking my cycle, eating healthier, even cutting back on coffee. And if you know me, you know that was a huge sacrifice. But still nothing. Eventually, I went to see a doctor. Ryan came with me, and I was so grateful for that. I thought, okay, we're in this together. We'll figure it out. After a bunch of tests and what felt like a million awkward conversations, I got the news. I had fertility issues. Basically, my chances of conceiving naturally were slim to none. Hearing that felt like someone had punched me in the chest. I cried the whole car ride home. Ryan tried to comfort me, but I could tell he was struggling with the news too. He wasn't angry or anything, just quiet. Like he didn't know what to say. And honestly, I didn't blame him. I didn't know what to say either. When we told my parents, though, their reaction was, well, let's just say it wasn't what I hoped for. My mom kind of just sat there silent, while my dad went into this weird lecture about how family legacy was important and how some women these days just don't take their roles seriously. I felt like I was being scolded for something I couldn't even control. After that, things with my parents got weird. They started pulling away, calling less, inviting us over less often. When we did see them, the conversations were short and awkward. My mom would make these passive-aggressive comments like, "It's such a shame. You two would have had such beautiful children. Or at least Jack will give us grandkids someday." Ryan and I decided we weren't giving up. We started saving for IVF, and for a while, it felt like we were back on the same team. But then, slowly, he started to change. He'd come home late from work, say he was too tired to talk and spend more time on his phone. I tried to brush it off, telling myself he was just stressed about everything. But deep down, I knew something was off. And then came the bombshell. One evening, while I was cleaning up after dinner, Ryan sat me down and said he needed to talk. He looked distant, like he was already halfway out the door. I remember holding my breath as he said the words, "I don't think this is working anymore." At first, I thought he meant us trying to have a baby. But no, he meant our marriage. I was stunned. I asked him why, what had changed, what I'd done wrong. And that's when it all came out. He told me he didn't think he could be with someone who couldn't give him a family, that he'd tried to be okay with it, but it was too much for him. And the kicker? He'd been talking to my parents about it for months. Apparently, they'd been telling him that he deserved someone who could give him what he wanted and that it wasn't too late for him to start over. I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My own parents had been encouraging my husband to leave me. I couldn't even process it. I just sat there, staring at him, while he packed a bag and walked out the door. The next few weeks were a blur. Ryan moved out, and I found out through a cousin that he was staying with, wait for it, my parents. They'd basically welcomed him in like a son, while I was left to fend for myself. I tried to confront them, but every time I called, they either ignored me or told me I was being too emotional. It was like they'd chosen him over me, their own daughter. And honestly, that broke me more than the divorce did. By the time the paperwork was finalized, I'd had enough. I packed up my things, quit my job, and moved to a little rental house in the suburbs. I didn't tell my parents or Ryan where I was going. I just disappeared. For the first time in my life, I chose myself. The move was probably the scariest thing I've ever done. I didn't have a plan, just a little bit of savings and a desperate need to get away. I ended up in this quiet little town about an hour outside the city. It was small, like everyone knows everyone's small, but it was exactly what I needed. No one knew me, no one knew my story, and for the first time in forever, I felt like I could just breathe. The first few months were rough, though. I'd spent so long being someone's wife or trying to prove myself to my family that I had no idea who I was without all that. I'd sit on my couch at night, staring at the walls, wondering if I'd made a huge mistake. But then I'd remind myself, I didn't leave because it was easy. I left because I deserved better. Eventually, I got into therapy, which honestly saved my life. My therapist, Dr. Hill, was this no-nonsense woman in her 50s who didn't let me spiral into self-pity. She helped me unpack all the crap I'd been carrying around. My parents' favoritism, my need for their approval, the way I'd let Ryan's love validate my worth. It was hard, ugly work, but it was also freeing. For the first time, I started to see myself as more than just someone's daughter or ex-wife. I was me, and that was enough. And then came the decision that changed everything. I was going to be a mom. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait, didn't she just go through all that heartbreak over not being able to have kids? Yeah, I did. And it was devastating. But sitting in therapy one day, I realized something. I didn't need a husband, or my parents' approval, or anyone else to make me happy. If I wanted to be a mom, I could choose to be a mom, on my terms. So, I started researching. I looked into adoption, fostering, surrogacy, and eventually landed on using a sperm donor with IVF. It felt like the right choice for me, something I could do independently without anyone else's baggage weighing me down. It wasn't an easy process. Seriously, IVF is no joke. But a year and a half later, my daughter Leah came into the world. You guys, I can't even put into words how much I love this kid. From the second I held her, it felt like my heart grew 10 sizes. She's got these big brown eyes and the tiniest little dimples when she smiles. Every time she giggles, it's like the world makes sense again. Being her mom has been the most challenging, exhausting, incredible thing I've ever done. She doesn't care about my past, or my mistakes, or the people I've cut out of my life. To her, I'm just mom, and that's enough. For 2 years, it was just me and Leah figuring things out together. I found a job. I loved doing graphic design for a small marketing firm. I made friends with my next-door neighbor, Hannah, who also happens to be Leah's babysitter and a total lifesaver. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd finally built something that felt solid, safe. And then one random Tuesday, everything came crashing back. I was at the park with Leah, pushing her on the swings, when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 3 years. Eileen. My stomach dropped. I turned around, and there they were, my parents, and standing beside them, looking just as stunned as I felt, was Ryan. For a second, I thought I was hallucinating. I mean, what were the odds? But nope, it was them, in the flesh, right there in front of me. My mom was the first to speak. She smiled this awkward, almost nervous smile and said, "We've been trying to find you." I didn't know what to say. My brain was scrambling, trying to figure out if I should grab Leah and run or just pretend they didn't exist. But before I could do anything, my dad chimed in. "We didn't know you had a child." And that's when it hit me. That's why they were here. It wasn't because they missed me or because they wanted to apologize. It was because they'd seen me with Leah. Suddenly, I wasn't their disappointment of a daughter anymore. I was their ticket to having a grandkid. I felt this wave of anger rise up in me. All those years of being ignored, belittled, replaced, and now they want it back in my life because I had something they wanted? No, absolutely not. Ryan, of course, decided this was the perfect moment to chime in. "Eileen," he said, taking a step closer. "I didn't know. I mean, if I'd known you could." "Stop." I cut him off. "Don't you dare finish that sentence." I could feel my hands shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm. Leah was still on the swing, laughing and totally oblivious, and I wasn't about to let them ruin this moment for her. I told them, as firmly as I could, that I wasn't interested in whatever it was they were selling. That Leah was my daughter, and they had no place in her life or mine. Then I grabbed her, packed up our stuff, and left. I wish I could tell you that was the end of it, that I walked away from them at the park and never heard from them again. But nope, because, of course, people like my parents and Ryan don't just let things go. They came back, and this time, they didn't bother hiding their real motives. A couple of days after the park incident, I got a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I peeked through the window, and there they were, my parents and Ryan, standing on my porch like some sort of unholy reunion tour. Leah was napping, and for a second I thought about just pretending I wasn't home. But then they started knocking louder, and I knew if I didn't deal with this now, they'd just keep coming back. So I opened the door, just a crack. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't wake Leah. My mom gave me her best concerned parent look, like she hadn't spent 30 years making me feel like I wasn't good enough. "Eileen, we just want to talk. Can we come in?" "No," I said flatly. "Say whatever you have to say right here." That's when my dad stepped in. "We're family, Eileen. We made mistakes, sure, but we've been trying to reach you for years. Don't you think it's time to move past all this?" I let out this bitter laugh before I could stop myself. "Move past it? You mean the part where you told my ex-husband to leave me because I couldn't have kids? Or the part where you took him in while I was falling apart? Which part exactly am I supposed to move past, Dad?" They both looked uncomfortable, but before they could answer, Ryan decided to make it worse. "Look, I know I messed up, okay? But seeing you at the park with your daughter, it made me realize how much I lost. I thought we could, I don't know, maybe start over." Start over. Like he hadn't completely destroyed my trust, my marriage, and my sense of self-worth. Like he hadn't walked out on me when I was at my lowest. I could feel the anger bubbling up again, but I forced myself to stay calm. "For Leah." "Ryan," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass, "you didn't lose anything. You chose to walk away. And now you think you can waltz back into my life just because I have a kid? Newsflash. She's not your second chance. She's my daughter, and you have no place here." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop him. "And you too," I said, turning to my parents, "don't think I don't see what's happening here. You didn't come looking for me because you suddenly care. You came because you want a relationship with Leah. Well, guess what? That's not happening. You don't get to ignore me for years and then swoop in when it's convenient for you." My mom tried to protest, but I'd had enough. "Leave," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Now, and don't come back." They hesitated for a moment, like they thought I might change my mind. But then I stepped back and started closing the door. That's when Ryan said something that stopped me cold. "She deserves to know her grandparents," he said. "And her father." I froze. Slowly, I turned back to him. "Her father? Are you out of your mind? You're not her father, Ryan. You're nothing to her." He had the audacity to look hurt, like he was the victim here. "I could be," he said quietly. "I want to be." I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh you let out when someone says something so ridiculous, you don't even know how to respond. "You're unbelievable," I said. "You think you can just show up and play dad because it suits you? You think I'd let you anywhere near her after everything you've done?" That's when I noticed the neighbors peeking out their windows. Great. Just what I needed. I took a deep breath and stepped back inside. If you don't leave, I'm calling the police. They must have believed me because they finally backed off. But Ryan wasn't done. This isn't over, Eileen, he said as they walked away. I'll fight for her if I have to. Fight for her? I slammed the door and locked it, my hands shaking. I couldn't believe the audacity of this man. This man who had abandoned me, who had sided with my toxic parents, who had the nerve to think he had any claim to my daughter. Later that night, when Leah was asleep, I called Hannah, my neighbor and babysitter. She came over, and I told her everything. She was furious on my behalf, and she helped me come up with a plan. The next morning, I contacted a lawyer and filed for a restraining order against Ryan. I also made it clear to my parents that if they kept trying to contact me, I'd take legal action against them too. Filing that restraining order felt like taking the final brick out of the wall that had been crushing me for years. It wasn't just about keeping Ryan away. It was about reclaiming my boundaries, my peace, my life. I'd spent so much time letting other people decide my worth, my future, my happiness. Not anymore. Ryan didn't take it well, of course. A few days later, he showed up at my house drunk, like slurring his words, leaning on my door frame for support drunk. Hannah was over babysitting Leah at the time, thank God, and she texted me while I was at work. Ryan's here. He's drunk. I've locked the door and called the cops. I swear I could have kissed her for being so level-headed. I rushed home, but by the time I got there, the police had already hauled him off. Leah was fine. Hannah kept her distracted with toys and snacks, but I could tell the whole thing had rattled her. It was the last straw for me. The restraining order was granted the next morning, and I haven't seen or heard from Ryan since. As for my parents, they must have gotten the message because they backed off too. I heard through the family grapevine that they've been trying to spin the story, telling relatives that I'm ungrateful and keeping their granddaughter away from them. Honestly, let them talk. I stopped caring what they think a long time ago. The thing is, I don't hate them. Not anymore. I think part of me did for a long time, but therapy helped me work through that. I've come to realize that hating them only gives them more power over me. Instead, I've just let them go. They're not my responsibility. They made their choices, and I've made mine. And my choice is to protect Leah and give her the kind of love and support I never had. Cutting ties with my parents and Ryan was like ripping off a Band-Aid. It hurt like hell at first, but now I feel so much lighter. I've started painting again, something I hadn't done in years, and I even sold a couple of pieces at a local art fair. Leah and I have a little routine now. Mornings at the park, lazy afternoons reading books, movie nights with popcorn and way too much candy. It's simple, but it's ours. And it's enough.